Hi, I'm Nick. That's a Christmas tree. This will be the second to last time that there's a Christmas tree. And this is 10 Minutes with Nick. Welcome to the show. I tell this to you from undisclosed locations as I prepare to go to another undisclosed location. The undisclosed location is California. I'm going back to California. That's the undisclosed location. But the first undisclosed location, if you've been listening to the podcast, is also obvious. I'm being secretive for no reason. Anyways, the second I drank a cup of Tim Hortons coffee, you'd know where I was, basically. Anyway, or would you? Anyways, so I get all of my content by looking at other people's content and then mocking their content, which is fun for me. Why? Because it gives me a sense of doing research and also puts some purpose to my doom scrolling when I start to dissociate, which is what millennials say for anytime they're not necessarily mentally feeling the best. They call it dissociation. It's probably not fully dissociation because a dissociative state is actually, it's a thing. It's not great, but it's a thing. I don't recommend it, by the way. Don't recommend it. But millennials use the word dissociative in a colloquial sense, and I am using the word dissociative in a colloquial sense. When I go into a dissociative state, it gives some purpose to my doom scrolling because then I can flag things and I can go back to them later and I can look at them and I can come up with beautiful content. I come up with 10 minutes of content to riff about, to just, as I saw in Seinfeld last night, as George said, to bebop and scat about. I don't know why would it have been the late 90s for the last few seasons of Seinfeld? Must have been the last few seasons of Seinfeld, late 90s. I don't know why bebop and scatting came into the minds of the Seinfeld writers, but it did. And so here I am parroting what they said because they're very funny people. And I'm just an idiot with a podcast. Anyways, so the video I saw today was from an account I follow called The Dadvocate, which I enjoy the account, right? Because I'm a sort of a middle of the road guy. I generally try to think of myself as middle of the road anyway on a lot of issues. And one of the things I see out in the world more than I see of the other side is that I see a lot of the pushback against men. Now, in a lot of ways, again, we've said this before, in a lot of ways that pushback had to happen. There's always some stuff going on. But the key was to push back against it without losing men. Like, you still need men. The world needs men. I'm not going to hear any arguments otherwise. I'm sorry. It needs everybody else too, but the world needs, like, just because the world needs one thing doesn't mean it doesn't need another thing, right? Like, just water requires oxygen and hydrogen. If you have just oxygen, you have nothing in your hand, and if you have just hydrogen, you have the hydrogen bomb. And that does something. It certainly does something, but it's not the only thing you need to get water. Anyways, so the Dadvocate today was mocking a video from a young woman who basically was trying to make the point that men have a tendency to do things we're not asked to do. And this was her illustration. She said, she looks around the world and she sees skyscrapers and roads and everything else. And the red pill argument, which is the community of men that I've mocked a few times, the red pill argument is always, oh, men built all that, so, you should be grateful. And she says, well, who asked you to do that? And of course, the retort to that is, really? The roads, the skyscrapers, the satellites, that sort of thing. You don't enjoy taking advantage of those things? But the point she was making, she made an illustration to, like, for example, when a party is trying to be put together, when people are trying to have a party, it's tendency of moms or women folk, and yes, I'm going to use the term women folk. It's the tendency of women folk to, do the things that are most probably immediate to the party, right? Like they focus on cleaning the house, they focus on making the meal, whereas men, for whatever reason, decide that is the time to do something like clean the garage. And that was a long-running joke in my family too, right? Like, something would need to get done for a party at the house, and for some reason, the guys would clean the garage. The reason being, of course, that my dad wanted to clean the garage, but it didn't necessarily directly relate to the party. But that was meant to be that. But that in my family, that was like a funny running joke, right? Like that was just kind of funny. And eventually, the garage did get cleaned, and we all went inside, and we did eventually all clean the house together and get it ready for company. This woman was trying to use it to make the point that men basically are useless, and everything we've done so far to this point is useless. And so the advocate was saying, well, no, that's just a silly takeaway from that. All the things you're talking about are very important. And the things that the TikTok video said, for example, you know what would have been better than roads is feeding hungry children. Roads infrastructure is sort of how you get food to the hungry children, or alternatively, get the hungry children away from the areas in which there is no food. Get them to the food, or get the food to them. It's interstate travel. It's only achievable via roads. In fact, the roads are so important that even the Romans came up with them. In fact, roads were so important that we came up with them before the Roman Empire. We had the Silk Road. That was a historical road. Irrigation systems were the only way that we could expand the amount of food we actually were able to grow and feed more people. Again, the advocate's point was the argument was a little silly, and I'm going to go one step further and say the argument is even more silly, because the mere fact that we haven't fed every hungry child does not mean we're not doing a better job of feeding hungry children now. If you think there were less hungry children multiple years ago, like, let's go back to like the 1930s is not fair. That was the Great Depression. There were obviously more hungry children then. Let's go back to even the 1920s. The Roaring 20s, the Gilded Age. Do you really think there were less hungry children then? I'm trying to get my semantics right here. Do you really think they were better at feeding the hungry children then than we are feeding the hungry children now? Now, granted, nowadays, there's all sorts of conspiracy theories around the people who do most of the feeding, for example, the Monsanto corporations and all them. We'll deal with those later. But it's indisputable. It's indisputable that we're better at caring for the needy and caring for the poor now than we were back then, which is why it's so criminal that there are so many poor and hungry still, because we are so good at it. But that's not the fault of men doing things that weren't asked for. If you think there are more important infrastructure projects, the simple answer is that you need more women in the positions to influence those things. And now I know someone's going to say, well, Nick, there's power structures in place that keep women out of seats of power. Well, those power structures are crumbling all around us all the time. Okay? The power structures only work if you, as an individual, decide that you have no effect. If you decide you have no effect and the person next to you decides they have no effect, you will have no effect. Congratulations. You've solved your problem. You can, in fact, wallow in your uselessness. That's really the key issue here. And what you have to remember is that you are only as ineffective as you choose to be. Statistics will tell you that most votes don't count, but the statistics account for that because they're taking into account the amount of the demographic that will not vote. That's based on past performance data. That's not based on future performance. I'll give you an example here in the city of Buffalo, which now is obviously the second undisclosed location that I mentioned earlier. City of Buffalo, Democratic city. You would assume the winner of the Democratic primary is basically a shoo-in for the mayor's office. And that's the way it's been for 10 years. The Democratic primary winner is the mayor, and we're just playing out the string on the other candidates. This year, or the last election, I should say, the incumbent mayor, Byron Brown, was running, but for some reason, he failed to run his primary campaign. He sort of discounted his primary opponents. And he got smoked in the primary. Absolutely smoked in the primary by a young upstart, India Walton. That was her name. India Walton was so popular that AOC was campaigning for her. But do you know what happened? The entire frickin' city of Buffalo did a write-in campaign, wrote in Byron Brown, and he beat India Walton in a write-in, upending what the statistics would tell you would happen in that election. Why? Because statistics are predictive of human behavior, assuming the conditions are the exact same as they were when the statistics were measured. They are only predictive in that scenario. But they become a self-fulfilling prophecy when you allow them to control you. Women, if you think men do things that are dumb, like build roads, I don't know why you would think that is dumb. But if you think that is dumb and you think that is not where our infrastructure dollars should be going, then don't allow 90% of road workers to be men. If you think trash collection is being done wrong, well, don't allow 99% of trash workers to be men. Your irrigation and sewer systems are done wrong. Don't allow your Department of Water to be 90%. The statistics will tell you that you can't do it, but that's because they're statistics and they're measuring things that have already happened. That will change the statistics. I'm overtime. Have a great day, everybody. I'm Nick. Christmas tree, 10 minutes with Nick. Have a great day.